Hey, this is Seth Harris from Harris Home Improvement here with another home improvement video, how-to video for you. In this video we're going to be discussing how to float a popcorn ceiling. Now in this case the ceiling has to be floated and not scraped because the popcorn has already been painted, so it's not coming off. There's nothing we can do to get this off, so you have to float compound over it. Here, this is the compound that I'm using. It is the +3 Blue Top by USG. This is my favorite kind of compound. No, it's not quick dry, but for a process like this, we don't need to use quick dry. As you look at this, you see there's a lot of air bubbles inside that compound. So before I actually do scoop it out, I'm going to want to give it kind of a quick little stir. It doesn't really need a whole lot of stirring. If you stir it too much, then you'll make it too sloppy. So I really only want to stir it just enough to like pop a lot of those air bubbles, or most of those air bubbles. So I'm just going to basically just move it around with my compound knife here a little bit. There, that's kind of what we want it to look like. And then I'm going to take this and scoop that out into my bucket, which I can't do with one hand while holding the phone. So I'm going to go ahead and fill my bucket up with compound. So I have a 12-inch compounding blade. You'll notice the blade is somewhat curved, right? One side is concave, the other side is convex. What we want to do for a floating job is use the concave side of the blade. Okay, that way as we are applying it to the ceiling, we won't be leaving any lines in our previous work. And when we're done with our work, right, there's a lot of, because of this texture on the ceiling, it's very easy. Like if you just skim coat it and scrape it back off, you're going to end up leaving lots of large ridges and lines that aren't going to sand smooth. And you want to try and get this done in 2 coats rather than 3 coats, right? If you skim coat each surface each time, then it's going to take 3 coats, but it takes just as long basically to throw a heavy coat on there and get it nice and smooth like this. See, that's towards the edge. You can see how those lines are appearing, but as you move through it, you can see I'm actually rather smoothing it out by putting it on nice and heavy. So this is the result that we're going to try and achieve. The first thing that you want to keep in mind is that you want to have an even amount of compound all the way across your taping knife. And so that's why I use this bucket, because it allows me to do just that very easily. Basically, I'm just going to dig a large amount of that compound out and then turn it over. That way, when I take the compound out on my knife, I can actually get a nice even amount, and I can take it off of the edges on both sides nice and easily. That way, when I'm actually squishing it into the ceiling, I don't get a whole lot falling out the edges. I mean, you're still going to get some, but if you don't take away those edges, you're going to get a whole lot of compound just falling all over the place, and you want to try and avoid making that much of a mess. Okay, I got my compound on my knife, ready to start my stroke. So as you can see, I'm just going to put my knife right up there into the corner and then jam it in. And then I'm going to apply my compound. And notice it didn't go all the way, it doesn't match. So as I scrape this back off and get that compound back on my blade, as I near the end, I'm going to squish it back in just to fill that up and even it out, right? And now I can do my side strokes. Fill in those bubbles. And now I'm going to put it on nice and heavy. Nice and heavy. Right? And then I'm going to smooth that heaviness out. Smooth the heaviness out with very light pressure. And then you see how nice and smooth that is. Okay? started my first line, I always go from the wall outwards, and then with every other move, I'm always going to work back into my work. So now I'm actually going to work from this side and go back into work. You always want to go back into your work, away from a wall and back into your work. That way you're not creating any dented lines in your previous work. The best thing you can do when floating a surface like this, or really with anything, is to be as methodical as possible. Right? That's why we're not just we're not going to apply this compound all over the place in a disorganized fashion. Right? We're going to start on one wall, one particular wall, and then we're going to methodically continue the process. Right? Zigzagging across the ceiling until we finish the whole thing. So now we're done with the ceiling. You can see it's gotten a lot smoother. Okay, day 2 of floating ceilings. As you can see, all the compound is nice and dry. Now, as you can see, I've plasticed off all the doorways. Right, this one's taped off from the other side. That's taped off completely. That's taped off completely. They need access to this for the washer and dryer, so that's got a flap to it. And this one, as you can see, I've only taped down one side of the doorway, so you can go through. There's another layer of plastic here, which is taped out on the opposite side of the doorway. That way I can get in and out, but the dust will end up getting trapped. So first things first, I have to sand all of the compound on this ceiling. Because I'm still going to be throwing another coat on there, I'm going to be using 60 grit sandpaper. Now, in my own personal opinion, my favorite way of doing this is to use sanding blocks, which, you know, makes a lot more dust fall in your face, but it ensures that, you know, with your face being a lot closer to what you're sanding, it makes sure that you actually see anything that you otherwise might miss, you know, which could lead to extra work being involved. And honestly, I mean, it takes a little bit more muscle grease to use these things, but it can be done in relatively the same amount of time as using a sanding pole. Although someday I will definitely be investing in a tool called Festool. Festool is a brand of power tools that makes tools for sanding, especially for jobs like these, which has a vacuum attachment to it so that all the dust as it's being created gets funneled into the vacuum, and you have much less cleanup to worry about. You probably don't even have to mask things off like this. And their power tools can either, be both on a pole, so you can do it from a distance, or handheld, which I like, using the handhelds, because then you get your face closer and you can make sure you're actually getting all of the blemishes that you need to get. By the way, it's very important to make sure you're wearing proper safety equipment when doing a job like this. You do not want to be creating a whole lot of dust and breathing that in. So make sure you get these face masks. They make all sorts of different kind. Right now I'm using the 3M Cool Flow. They all basically work the same though. The most important thing is that it's got a nice snug fit so that dust can't get through. Basically, I'm going to be just as methodical as I was when I was applying the compound. I'm going to zigzag across the ceiling, but... Okay, as you can see, it's all vacuumed clean now. Nothing I can do about the dust on the plastic, of course, because it's stuck there by static. And alright, so now I'm going to get ready and throw my second coat of compound on the ceiling, which is going to include all the different patches that I made. I'm going to throw it right over everything this time and make everything nice and tight and flush. Alright, so there's where I'm going next. Oh, let's make sure you can hear me by not covering the microphone. There's where I'm going next. This is what I got so far. Real nice and baby smooth, especially as compared to this, although you probably can't see it on the camera. As you can maybe see on the camera, I don't know if you can, there's a little bump here from a larger piece of texture, and it seems I have a few of those all throughout the ceiling, so I'm having to put this on a little bit thicker than I want to. A skim coat just ain't gonna cut it. So seeing these light, smooth finish strokes help get rid of all those bubbles. So I'm not too concerned about little edges like this or little lines like that. Those will sand out. It's mostly bubbles that I'm concerned about. Okay, as you can see, we are almost 100% dry. There's really just a tiny little bit in this corner that hasn't fully dried, but everything else is now 100% perfectly dry. I'm probably just going to have to touch that up with compound. It looks like it's still recessed. We'll see when I'm done sanding. In any case, everything is now nice and dry, so I can begin sanding. Okay, so let's talk what to sand with when it comes to the final coat. When it comes to your first coat, you can pretty much do whatever you want. You can use a sanding pole, you can use a palm sander. If you have a festal, you can use that. I don't know how festals are when it comes to the final coat or not, because I've never had the opportunity to use one yet. But when it comes to the final coat, you want your finished product to be as smooth as possible. You do not want any scratch marks to appear. You won't see the scratch marks quite so easily on the compound itself if you don't sand it properly. Like if you use a sand pole, for example, you're definitely going to get some sand marks. It doesn't matter what grit of paper you use. If you use even 220 grit, you're still going to get scratch lines on your work. So what you want to do is use a sand sponge like one of these. If you have a fine grit, like this is a 120 grit here, but this is brand new, so I don't even want to use this guy unless I scuff it up first. If I didn't have an alternative, then I would probably just take this and scuff it along the subfloor here to wear it down a little before I used it to make it nice and smooth. You want something really nice and smooth. This one is an extra fine sanding sponge, which has, as you can tell, it's already been used quite a bit. So it's really nice and smooth, right? It's definitely not going to leave any scratch marks on the ceiling when I sand with this. So I'm going to be using that one in this case, because it's always best to use something that's already well worn in, because it's going to make your finish a lot smoother than if you use, say, a brand new sand sponge like this. And you do want to make sure you hit every square inch, because the difference between, like, it's nice and smooth, but it's not quite as smooth as it's going to be after being sanded. Right? So you see how, like, this is where I sanded, and this is where I haven't sanded. Now, I don't think you can really see it with the camera except by the shadow of it, right? You can see the shadow of how there's this tiny little bit of texture there. From the compound just, drying and shrinking. And then after being sanded, you can see it's a lot smoother. And that's the result we're looking for. One important thing to keep in mind as you go through this process of sanding is that your hand, your bare hand, as you rub it against the surface that you're sanding, will feel a lot more than your eyes will see, okay? And if you can feel it, then when there's paint on there, you'll be able to see it, okay? So if you feel something while you're smoothing your hand over it, rubbing your hand over it, then you'll want to make sure you sand that until you feel that it's smooth. That way it doesn't show up later when you put paint on it. Okay, so as you can see, I've vacuumed in here, I've cleaned up my mess before I continue on doing anything else. For the very reason that it's extremely important to clean up a mess like this before you move on. That way you don't end up tracking it around and making it more difficult to clean up and making a bigger mess to clean up later, so that you can save time. Other than that, the ceiling is now sanded, and it's basically perfectly smooth. I know there's going to be a few touch-ups that are going to have to be done. There's always a few touch-ups that'll have to be done. And so what I'm going to do is, after I throw my first coat of paint on, which will be probably on Monday when I come back, let that dry, and that'll reveal to me what needs to be touched up. And so then I'll touch those up after the paint goes on. And then before I put my second coat of paint on, I'll basically spot prime those touch-up areas, which will, because you need to put 2 coats of paint on compound, basically. So I'm going to spot prime those touch-up areas, let that dry for about a half hour, then throw my second coat on. And then right before I do my touch-ups, what I'm going to do is I'm going to caulk around all of the corners where the wall meets the ceiling, so that, and it's going to be a quick dry caulk. So by the time I'm done sanding all of the touch-up areas, I'll be ready to throw my second coat of paint on, and then this will be a perfectly flat and smooth ceiling.